watching my charming, feckless brother Charles gamble away our family fortune, leaving me penniless and alone in a world that prized wealth above all else. My parents, blinded by their golden child, let it happen. I died bitter, broken, and forgotten. The drawing room smelled like old money and unspoken tension. Mostly my unspoken tension, I guess. I sat there, practically glued to the chair in that awful black dress. It felt like a straitjacket, not mourning clothes. Charles, of course, couldn't sit still, bouncing his leg like he had ants in his pants. Couldn't even pretend to be sad about father. Mum was dabbing at her eyes, but let's be honest, she only really looked sad when she was looking at him. At Charles. Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, all stiff and proper, cleared his throat. That sound always made me nervous. He had the will in his hands, crisp paper. Probably worth more than my life was about to be, judging by the way things were going. "We are gathered here today," he droned, like he'd said it a million times before, probably had, "to hear the reading of the last will and testament of Mr. Arthur Langley." I gripped the arms of the chair. Okay, deep breaths. Father had promised me we'd be partners, equal partners. He'd said so over and over. And to my son, Charles, Henderson continued, and I swear he looked right at Charles when he said it, I leave the majority share of Langley Enterprises along with the family estate Highwood Manor. Majority? Wait, what? That wasn't the deal. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting. That wasn't what Father said. Charles naturally looked like he'd won the lottery. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I won't disappoint. I'll make Father proud. Mr. Perfect, as always. Mum practically swooned. Of course you will, my darling boy. You always do. Ugh. I had to say something. And what about the provisions for my future, Mr. Henderson? My voice sounded way too small, even to me. Henderson cleared his throat again. I hated that. To my daughter, Vivian, I leave a modest sum sufficient for her continued comfort and a small cottage on the edge of the estate. A modest sum? A cottage? Seriously. After all the hours I'd put in, managing the accounts, basically being Father's right hand while Charles was off gallivanting, this was a slap in the face. A huge slap in the face, and Charles, ever the gracious winner, waved his hand like he was royalty. Don't fret, Vivi. I'll take care of you. Always have, haven't I? Oh, that smile. So charming. So fake. I could see right through it. I wanted to scream, to shout about all the work I'd done, about Father's actual words. But Charles was already talking over me. I appreciate your concern, sister. Really, I do. However, Father and I discussed this at great length, and we agreed that I am better suited to any future endeavors of Langley Enterprises. Don't you agree, Mother? My mother predictably fell right in line, nodding so hard I thought she'd get whiplash. Oh, absolutely. She can't be expected to do all that. Business. She can find a husband and do other things. Other things? Other things. Father and I had plans, Charles, I retorted, barely controlling my anger. We were planning on expanding, getting new machinery. He laughed. The kind of laugh that makes you want to punch someone. Now, Vivi. Leave the business to me. You can relax. Maybe learn how to sew. I could feel my face getting hot. Arguing with him was like talking to a brick wall, especially with Mum hanging on his every word. We need to run the business together, I said one more time, but he didn't even acknowledge me. I'm in charge now. I know best, he stated and leaned back with a smirk. I just sat there fuming. This wasn't just unfair. It was a betrayal. And it was clear this was just the beginning. The next few months? A complete nightmare. Like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Only the train was carrying everything I cared about. Just one more bet, Vivi, Charles would say, flashing that award-winning smile. This one's a sure thing. We'll be rich. And I, stuck with the books that looked worse every day, would say something brilliant like, Charles, we're losing everything. Father's business is going under. Don't be such a worrywart, he'd say, like I was being unreasonable. I've got it handled, just a little bump in the road. And Mum? Leave him be, Vivian. He knows what he's doing. He's a Langley. As if that meant anything anymore. One night, I found him in his study, which was starting to look more like a gambling den, with a bunch of guys who looked like they'd bite your face off for a shilling. Charles, who are these people? I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Business associates, he said, all shifty-eyed. We're discussing opportunities. One of them, a giant with a scar across his cheek, grinned at me. Your brother's a real risk taker, Miss Langley, a real gambler. Charming. Mr. Langley? Another one said, this one all sharp angles and a voice like a rusty hinge. Your debts are mounting. We need to discuss repayment. Charles, red-faced and sweating, just waved him off. I'll pay you back, double. Just give me some time. I'm expecting a big payout. I tried. God, I tried. Mother, we have to do something. He's gambling everything away. But Mum, bless her heart, was completely under his spell. Charles is a Langley, she'd say again, like it was some kind of magic spell. He'll figure it out. He always does. Figuring it out apparently meant selling off everything that wasn't nailed down. I sold some of the land, he announced one day, all casual, like he was talking about selling a used handkerchief. Sold the land? The land Father set aside for the new factory? I practically shrieked. He just rolled his eyes. Relax, I'm in charge now. And the whispers started. About Charles owing money, about the Langley name being mud, about us being ruined. I heard them. I felt them. But Charles, still gambling, still spending, still promising it would all be okay. And Mum, still believing him. The rain was coming down like the sky was crying. Fitting, really. I stood on the doorstep of my tiny apartment, all I had left, clutching that old photo of Father. The glass was cracked, but his smile, it was the only thing that felt even remotely warm. A man in a uniform, looked like a bailiff, came up the walk. He looked tired, but not unkind. Miss Langley? I just nodded, couldn't even speak. I have a court order, he said, holding out the paper. You have to vacate the premises. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. But where will I go? I managed to whisper. The bailiff sighed. I'm sorry, miss. That's not my concern. My brain was scrambling, grasping for anything. Charles, he promised. Stupid. What good were his promises? He shook his head. Mr. Charles Langley has no assets remaining, miss. He can't help you. He can't help anyone. He used me. It wasn't even a question anymore. He used all of us. He'd charmed his way through life, and I, the responsible one, was left with absolutely nothing. I stepped out into the rain. My dress, thin and cheap, was soaked in seconds. My one suitcase held everything I owned. Nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The family I'd given everything to had tossed me aside. The betrayal, it was like a physical pain settling deep in my bones. The charity hospital smelled like sickness and despair, pretty much how I felt. I lay in this tiny, hard bed, feeling like I was fading away. Which I was, I guess. Charles, I whispered. It wasn't even his name anymore. It was a curse. A young nurse, bless her, took my hand. Try to rest, dear, she said. He took everything. I managed to get out. It took all my strength. Father, I failed you. That thought hurt more than anything. I failed myself. I'd been so busy being good, being responsible, and that I'd let him walk all over me. The nurse leaned in. Is there anyone you'd like me to call? Family? I closed my eyes. One tear, that's all I had left. No one. Because there was no one. My breathing got shallower, everything was getting dark, and then nothing. I gasped, my eyes flew open. Sunlight, my canopy bed. What? I sat up, heart hammering. I looked around. My room, at Highwood. I practically leapt out of bed and ran to the mirror. Younger, healthier, no lines around my eyes. My hair, it was brown again. It can't be. Then I saw the calendar, the date. It was 10 years earlier, 10 years before the will, before everything went to hell. I'm back, I whispered. My hands were shaking. This wasn't a dream. This was real. A smile. A slow, dangerous smile. Not the sweet, fake smile I used to wear. This one was all teeth. Charles, I said, my voice a low growl. You have no idea what's coming. This wasn't just a second chance. This was payback. I had 10 years worth of knowledge. 10 years of anger. 10 years of planning to do. And this time, he wouldn't see it coming. Not a chance. Breakfast at Highwood. Ugh, just looking at the spread, eggs, bacon, kippers, toast, enough food to feed a small army made my stomach churn. But I had a part to play, and I was going to play it perfectly. Charles naturally was holding court, practically bursting with self-importance. Morning all. Father, I had the most brilliant idea about expanding the shipping division. Father, beaming, lapped it up. Always thinking, my boy. That's what I like to see. Time for my entrance. I put on my best sweet, slightly dim sister smile. Charles, that sounds wonderful, I said, making sure to inject just the right amount of admiration into my voice. You really do have such a head for business. He preened, just like I knew he would. Well, someone in this family has to, he said with a pointed look in my direction. Oh, he thought he was so clever. Let him think that, I thought, taking a delicate sip of my tea. Let him think he's in control. It'll make the fall that much harder. Mum, predictably, was gazing at Charles like he was the second coming. Vivian, dear, you're awfully quiet. Are you feeling all right? Just admiring Charles' ambition, Mother, I said smoothly. We're so lucky to have him. I almost choked on the words, but I managed to keep the smile plastered on my face. Indeed, Father chimed in, stroking his chin thoughtfully. Perhaps we should give Charles more control over the finances, eh? Give him a chance to really spread his wings. What do you think, Vivian? This was it. My opening. An excellent idea, Father, I said, widening my eyes innocently. I've been finding the accounts a bit overwhelming lately. All those numbers. Charles is so much better at that sort of thing. I trust Charles completely. I even managed a little flutter of my eyelashes. Oscar-worthy performance, really. I could certainly use the break from it, I continued, as if it was an afterthought. Charles practically glowed. He looked like a puffed-up peacock. Hook, line, and sinker. The rest of breakfast was a blur of Charles expounding on his brilliant plans, Father nodding approvingly and Mum gazing adoringly. I chimed in with the occasional, "Oh, really?" and "How clever?" Just enough to keep them convinced I was completely clueless. They have no idea, I thought, a secret smile playing on my lips. They have absolutely no idea. The game was on. Mr. Henderson's office was all dark wood and the musty smell of old legal documents. Perfect. I needed discreet, and this place practically screamed it. Mr. Henderson, I said, once the door was closed and we were seated. I need to discuss something sensitive, something concerning my father's will. He looked surprised, of course. Adjustments, Miss Langley, but your father's in good health. Let's just say I've had a premonition, I said, letting a hint of, what was it, mystical worry creep into my voice. A very strong one. And I want to ensure my future is secure. One must take precautions, yes? He looked skeptical, but I was ready. I slid a set of documents across the desk. Forgeries, of course, but excellent forgeries. I'd spent weeks perfecting Father's signature, practicing his phrasing. It was almost art. These are my father's revised instructions, I said, keeping my voice steady. He wishes to amend the distribution of assets, to protect them and me. Henderson peered at the documents, his brow furrowed. These seem in order, but... Time for the clincher. I slid a small, very heavy pouch across the desk. The clink of gold was music to my ears. For your discretion, Mr. Henderson, I said softly. And your continued loyalty to the Langley family. He hesitated for only a moment, then his hand closed over the pouch, making it disappear with a practiced swiftness. Of course, Miss Langley, your secret is safe with me. Excellent, I said with a genuine smile this time. There's one more thing. I have a reason to be concerned over my brother's spending habits. I'm not saying he has bad intentions, but he does take after our mother's side of the family. They're a bit irresponsible when it comes to money, I confided in him. As a precaution, I need access to certain family accounts so I can keep an eye on things. Mr. Henderson nodded. Of course, Miss Langley. I completely understand. I will arrange it immediately. I left his office feeling a thrill course through me. It was working. The pieces were falling into place. And Mr. Henderson? He was just another pawn in my game. My bedroom became my war room. Late at night, by candlelight, I worked. Ledgers, bank statements, letters. They were my weapons. I was building a fortress, brick by brick, and dismantling Charles's empire at the same time. He thinks he's so smart, I muttered to myself, signing a transfer document with a flourish. Let's see how smart he is when he's got nothing. It was painstaking work, transferring funds, creating shell corporations, forging signatures. It was like weaving a spider web, intricate and deadly, and I was the spider, patiently waiting in the center. Mother always said I had a knack for numbers, I thought, a wry smile twisting my lips. She never imagined I'd put it to such good use. I knew Charles. I knew his weaknesses, his habits, his predictable moves. He loved gambling, he loved showing off, he loved the illusion of wealth. So I let him have it. I let him think he was winning, while I quietly, meticulously pulled the rug out from under him. I set up accounts in his name, then drained them. I forged his signature on loans he'd never know about until it was too late. I created a paper trail that would lead any investigator in circles, a labyrinth of deceit that would ultimately lead back to nothing. Just a little adjustment here and here, I whispered, signing another document, my hand moving with practiced ease. It was almost fun. Almost. Each transaction, each signature, each forged document was a nail in Charles's coffin, and I was hammering them in with a grim satisfaction. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he was in control. He was about to learn a very, very painful lesson, and I was going to be the one to teach it to him. The gentlemen's club was all smoke and hushed whispers and the clinking of glasses. Honestly, it smelled like stale sweat and desperation, but it was the perfect place to observe and to nudge Charles in the right direction. Downward, preferably. I'd accidentally run into him and Lord Ashworth, a notorious gambler with a reputation for being unforgiving. Perfect. Charles, of course, was bragging loudly. Ashworth, my friend, I'm on a winning streak. I tell you, I have a gift. Lord Ashworth, a slimy character with eyes that reminded me of a shark, smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. Indeed, Mr. Langley, you seem to have a knack for risk-taking. Time for my little contribution. Charles has always been fearless, Lord Ashworth, I said, batting my eyelashes innocently. He takes after our father in that regard. Charles puffed up like a rooster. That's right, Vivi. Gotta be bold to win big, eh? Absolutely, I agreed, my voice dripping with sweetness. And with the family fortune behind you, there's really no limit, is there? I made sure to emphasize family fortune. Let him think it was still there. Let him believe he was invincible. My investments have been doing exceptionally well, Charles bragged. Oh, I wouldn't doubt that, I replied quickly. I don't concern myself with all of that. I trust you completely. I'm just here for the company. I gave Ashworth a dazzling smile. It was like watching a predator circle its prey. Ashworth was circling Charles, and I was giving him a little push. All in the name of family, of course. The next few weeks were a carefully orchestrated dance. I watched, I waited, and I let Charles dig his own grave, deeper and deeper. It was easy to keep track of his downward spiral. Snippets of conversations, overheard whispers, increasingly frantic letters arriving at the house. It all painted a very clear picture. Double or nothing, Ashworth, I heard Charles yell one night, stumbling out of a gambling den, his face flushed, his clothes disheveled. Your confidence is admirable, Mr. Langley, Ashworth replied, his voice smooth as silk, but with a razor-sharp edge. But your credit is running thin. I'll have the money, Charles insisted, his voice slurring slightly. Don't you worry about that. He wouldn't even meet his eye. Another time I saw him arguing with a different creditor, a man with a hard face and cold eyes. Mr. Langley, we need to discuss your outstanding payments, now. Tell them to wait, Charles shouted, his bravado crumbling. I'm good for it. He sounded less and less convinced each time. He started throwing even more lavish parties as if the sheer display of wealth could somehow magically erase his debts. Another bottle of the finest champagne, I had him instruct a servant. It was pathetic, really, and yet satisfying. Each desperate gamble, each frantic denial, each mounting debt. It was all music to my ears. He was sinking fast, and he had no idea I was the one holding him underwater. The day it all came crashing down was glorious. I'd made sure to be out for the afternoon, conveniently near Charles's apartment. I wanted a front row seat for the show. I saw Ashworth arrive, flanked by two rather large, rather intimidating men. Bailiffs, I presumed. Excellent. A few minutes later, I heard the shouting. It was muffled, but I could still make out Charles's voice, rising in panic. Impossible, there must be some mistake. Then Ashworth's voice, cold and final. Mr. Langley, the time has come. I need payment in full. I told you I'll have it. Charles sounded desperate now, his usual arrogance gone. Just give me a few more days. I've been patient enough. Your family fortune is legendary. Surely you can settle accounts. That was my cue. Of course I can. Charles was practically screaming now. I'll just withdraw the funds. Then silence. A beautiful, glorious silence. The bailiff started carrying things out of the apartment. Furniture, paintings, Charles's precious collection of ridiculously expensive waistcoats. It was a parade of his shattered dreams. Finally, Charles stumbled out, his face white as a sheet, his eyes wide with terror. He looked broken. Good. He tried his accounts. I knew that, of course. He tried every card and every combination. He knew something was wrong. Very, very wrong. I'd timed my arrival at Mr. Henderson's office perfectly. Charles was already there, ranting and raving like a madman. Henderson, there's been a mistake. My accounts are empty. Where's the money? He looked like he was about to explode. Mr. Henderson, bless his bought and paid for soul, remained perfectly calm. I'm afraid there's no mistake, Mr. Langley. Your sister, Miss Vivian Langley, is now the primary beneficiary of your father's estate. Charles stared at him, dumbfounded. Vivian, but that's impossible. She doesn't know anything about business. Henderson, ever the professional, simply said, apparently she knows more than you give her credit for. And that's when I walked in. Hello, Charles, I said, my voice as smooth as silk. Surprised? He turned to me, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. You did this? I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. I merely took what was rightfully mine and ensured you couldn't squander it. The look on his face, it was priceless. The shock, the anger, the utter, complete bewilderment. It was better than any champagne, better than any winning hand. It was the sweet taste of revenge, served cold, and I was savoring every single drop. The drawing room, the scene of so many family gatherings, now felt like a battlefield. Charles had dragged me back to Highwood, practically spitting with rage, demanding that our parents fix this. He clearly thought they'd take his side, as they always had. He was in for a rude awakening. Mother, father, you have to help me. Charles was practically yelling, his face contorted with desperation. Vivian's stolen everything. She's a thief. Mum looked bewildered, clutching her pearls. Vivian, what are you talking about, Charles? What's happened? Father, however, looked more stern than confused. Charles, explain yourself. Mr. Henderson informed me of some disturbing developments. He said your accounts are empty. She manipulated him. She forged documents. She tricked me. Charles ranted, pointing a trembling finger at me. He was like a cornered animal, lashing out blindly. I, on the other hand, remained perfectly calm. I'd been waiting for this moment. I simply corrected a mistake, Father, I said, my voice steady and even. Charles was unfit to manage the family fortune. He proved that himself. I walked over to the mahogany desk where I'd carefully arranged a stack of documents. Here's the proof, I said, spreading them out. These are Charles's gambling debts. I pointed to one pile. These are the records of the assets he sold off, at a fraction of their value. I indicated another. And these, I said, holding up a carefully crafted ledger, are the real accounts showing where the money actually went. Father picked up the documents, his eyes scanning the pages with growing horror. Mum peered over his shoulder, her face paling with each passing moment. Is this true, Charles? Father asked, his voice dangerously low. Charles stammered, I can explain. He couldn't, of course. He could only offer weak excuses and half-hearted denials. Explain what, Charles? I challenged him. Explain how you gambled away our inheritance? How you lied to Mother and Father? How you left me with nothing? Mum gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Charles, you didn't. She looked like she was about to faint. He did, Mother. I said, my voice hardening. And I stopped him. Before it was too late. Before he ruined us all. I held up another document. The real will, the one I'd painstakingly reconstructed, reflecting Father's original intentions. This is what Father wanted, an equal partnership, not Charles's sole control. The silence in the room was thick with tension. Father continued to read, his face growing darker with each passing line. The truth was there, in black and white, undeniable. Finally, he looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and disappointment. I trusted you, Charles, he said, his voice shaking. I gave you everything, and you repaid that trust with this? He gestured to the damning documents. Charles, seeing his carefully constructed world crumble around him, tried one last desperate plea. Father, please, you can't believe her. She's always been jealous of me. She's lying. Lying? I raised an eyebrow. Am I lying about the debts, Charles? Am I lying about the empty accounts? Am I lying about the fact that you left your own sister homeless and destitute? Mum finally found her voice, a weak, trembling sound. Charles, tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't. He couldn't. He just stood there, defeated, his usual charm and bravado completely gone. He looked pathetic. Father stood up, his tall frame radiating authority. Get out, he said, his voice cold and hard. Father, please, you can't. Charles started, but Father cut him off. Don't make me say it again. Get out. You are no son of mine, and you will never step foot inside Highwood again, so help me God. He pointed towards the door, his hand trembling with barely suppressed rage. Charles stared at him, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at Mum, searching for some sign of support, but she just turned away, tears streaming down her face. He looked at me, his gaze filled with hatred. And then he left. He walked out of the drawing room, out of Highwood, and, for all intents and purposes, out of our lives. The silence that followed was broken only by Mum's quiet sobs. Father stood by the window, his shoulders slumped, looking older than his years. I stood there, watching them. A strange mixture of triumph and sadness. I'd won. But the victory felt hollow. The family was broken, perhaps irreparably. But I'd done what I had to do. I'd saved what was left of our legacy, and I'd finally gotten justice. I followed him, not out of sympathy, but out of a need to close the circle, to have the last word. He was standing at the edge of the long, winding driveway, his meager belongings packed into a single, pathetic-looking suitcase. He looked small, shrunken. Nothing like the arrogant, self-assured Charles Langley who had swaggered into the drawing room just hours before. He turned as I approached, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a mixture of anger and— was that fear? Vivian, please, he began, his voice hoarse and pleading. You can't do this to me. I'm your brother. Brother. The word felt like acid on my tongue. You were my brother, I corrected him coldly. The brother who stole my inheritance, who left me with nothing, who let me starve and die alone. He flinched as if I'd struck him. I was going to pay you back. I always intended to. He was lying, of course. He'd always been a liar. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the stillness of the afternoon. You lie as easily as you breathe, Charles. You never intended to do anything but enrich yourself, at everyone else's expense. We can fix this, he insisted, his voice cracking with desperation. We can go back to the way things were. Ah, the way things were, him on top, me scraping by, grateful for any scraps he threw my way. Not a chance. I tilted my head, a slow, deliberate movement, and looked him straight in the eye. Oh, dear brother, I said, letting my voice drip with a sweetness that was utterly fake. Why would I stop you from gambling my inheritance when I already took yours first? The words hung in the air, heavy and final. His face crumpled. It was like watching a building collapse in on itself, all the supports giving way at once. You planned this all along? He whispered, his voice barely audible. From the moment I woke up in that bed, 10 years younger, I confirmed, my voice steady and calm. I knew what you would do, Charles. I knew exactly what you would do. and I decided to do it better, to do it first. I I have nothing, he said, stating the obvious. The realization seemed to finally be sinking in. Exactly, I replied, the word a sharp, clean cut. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. He looked lost, utterly, completely lost. You are a monster, he stated plainly. I shrugged. Perhaps, but I am a monster with an inheritance. He turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He knew, and I knew, that it was over. He was ruined, and I was free. The weight of 10 years of bitterness, of resentment, of planning, lifted from my shoulders. It was a strange feeling, this emptiness, but it was clean. I'd balanced the scales, and I'd won. I stood on the steps of Highwood, watching Charles's retreating figure disappear down the long drive. The gravel crunched under his feet, a final fading sound. He was gone. And it was over. I took a deep breath, the crisp autumn air filling my lungs. It felt different, lighter, cleaner. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt truly free. It's over, I thought, the realization settling over me like a warm blanket. He's gone, and I'm free. My gaze swept across the vast grounds of the estate, the rolling hills, the manicured gardens, the ancient trees. It was all mine. Not just the property, but the power, the control, something I'd been denied for so long. They underestimated me, I thought, a small, satisfied smile playing on my lips. They all did, father, mother, Charles. They saw me as the quiet, dutiful daughter, the one who would always follow the rules, the one who would never cause any trouble. Well, I'd certainly caused some trouble. But I showed them, I thought, turning back towards the house. I showed them all. I wasn't just dutiful Vivian anymore. I was something else, something stronger, something more. I walked back inside, the heavy oak door closing behind me with a solid, reassuring thud. The house felt different, too. It was no longer a gilded cage, a symbol of my family's expectations and my own limitations. It was mine. I walked into the study, Father's old sanctuary. The scent of leather and old books still lingered in the air, a comforting reminder of him. I sat down in his chair, the leather creaking softly beneath me. It felt right. Father would be proud, I thought, a pang of sadness hitting me. Not of the methods, perhaps. He wouldn't have approved of the deceit, the manipulation, but of the result. Yes, I think he would have been proud. He always valued strength, resilience, the ability to not survive, and I had survived. I had thrived. I opened the top drawer of the desk, pulling out a blank sheet of paper and a pen. Time to get to work. First, I needed to contact the bank, consolidate the accounts, make sure everything was secure. Then, I needed to review the company's books, assess the damage Charles had done, and start formulating a plan for recovery. The textile division, that was where Father and I had seen the most potential. We'd had plans. I started writing, my hand moving quickly across the page, outlining my ideas, making lists, setting priorities, expand the textile division, invest in new machinery, explore new markets. There was so much to do. But for the first time, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt exhilarating. I was no longer the helpless sister, the betrayed daughter. I was Vivian Langley, owner of Langley Enterprises, mistress of Highwood Manor. I was in control of my own destiny, and I wasn't going to waste it. I paused, pen hovering over the paper, and looked out the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. It was a new day, a new beginning. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt hope. A quiet, steady hope, burning bright within me. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was mine. And I was ready.